Could one conversation really bring the British monarchy to the edge of chaos? Could one confession shatter decades of loyalty, love, and carefully curated public image? Imagine the weight of a legacy you were born to protect, now being twisted into leverage against you. That is exactly where Prince Harry found himself, a prince torn between the memory of his mother, Princess Diana, and the woman he loved, Meghan Markle. And what he admitted in private meetings with his brother Prince William and father King Charles is about to shock the world. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The first whispers were subtle, almost imperceptible. A raised eyebrow here, a fleeting text message there. Moments that seemed inconsequential but would later unravel into something seismic. For years, the royal family had maintained an ironclad public front, stoic, regal, untouchable. But beneath the polished exterior, tensions had been simmering, tensions no one outside the palace walls could have anticipated. And then it happened, a revelation so explosive that even the most seasoned royal aides were left speechless. Harry had confessed something no one could have predicted, that Meghan had pressured him to leverage his mother's legacy against the palace. To use the memory of Diana, the beloved people's princess, as a tool in a power struggle. It sounds surreal, even unbelievable. How could anyone consider exploiting the legacy of one of the most revered figures in British history for personal gain? And yet, Harry's admission is not only shocking. It's a window into the complex web of love, manipulation, and betrayal that had been quietly unraveling behind closed doors. Imagine being in Harry's shoes. Every choice scrutinized, every emotion dissected. The world watching, waiting, judging. And then imagine the woman you love, someone you trust with your heart and future, quietly urging you to use something sacred as leverage. Could you resist? Would you even know you were being manipulated until it was too late? These are the questions that haunt the corridors of Buckingham Palace today. And the answers, as Harry revealed, are as complicated as the family dynamics that define the monarchy itself. The stakes could not have been higher. Diana's legacy was not just a personal memory. It was a symbol of public trust, a beacon of compassion, and a standard of moral integrity. To misuse it, even under duress, risked alienating millions of people who still revered her decades after her tragic death. And yet, according to Harry, Meghan's insistence was relentless. She framed it not as manipulation but as a necessary step, a way to pressure the palace into bending to their wishes. It was an emotional pressure campaign that tested Harry's loyalty, his judgment, and ultimately his love for both his family and his wife. But why now? Why would Harry, the prince who once seemed determined to carve a separate path from the palace, choose this moment to reveal the truth? The answer lies in a convergence of events that had been quietly building for months. Leaked documents, investigative reporting, and behind-the-scenes conversations had all started painting a picture that no one in the royal family could ignore. And as the pressure mounted, Harry reached a breaking point. He had to speak, if only to unburden himself from the guilt he had carried silently. The tension in that room, the one-on-one meetings with William and Charles, was almost palpable. Every word, every pause, every carefully chosen sentence carried weight. Imagine sitting across from your brother, the future king, knowing that your confession could redefine your relationship forever. Then imagine the father you had once idealized, now a monarch balancing the weight of centuries-old tradition with the very real threat of scandal. The emotional stakes were as high as the historical stakes. The monarchy, the media, and the public were all watching, whether they realized it or not. And yet, Harry did it. He admitted it. The words themselves were carefully measured, not out of deceit, but out of fear. Fear of public outrage, fear of familial repercussions, fear of irreversible damage. She wanted me to leverage Diana's memory, he said. Imagine the internal conflict as he spoke. Love, loyalty, guilt, and the desperate desire to protect both his family and his wife. How could he reconcile such competing emotions? How could he justify the very act he knew might be seen as a betrayal? These questions reverberated silently across the walls of Buckingham Palace and, eventually, the world. What makes this story even more compelling is that it's not just a personal family drama. It's a historical event in the making. The British monarchy has survived centuries of political upheaval, public scrutiny, and private scandal. Yet here was a revelation that struck at the core of its moral authority, challenging not just the actions of one prince, but the very principles upon which the institution stands. And the public, hungry for insight into a family long shrouded in secrecy, could sense that something monumental was unfolding. Every headline, every whisper, every leaked detail became a thread in a narrative that captivated millions worldwide. But the emotional stakes do not stop there. Harry's admission triggered a cascade of consequences that would reverberate far beyond the palace walls. William's reaction, Charles's response, and the public's outcry all became part of a story that blended family loyalty, duty, love, and betrayal. This is the story of a prince caught between worlds, the private world of love and marriage, and the public world of tradition and expectation. Every decision, every revelation, every emotional spike matters because it reveals the human side of a monarchy often viewed as untouchable and untarnished. And what makes it even more gripping is the contradiction at the heart of the story. Harry's love for Meghan was genuine, his desire to protect his family real, yet he found himself entangled in a moral quagmire. Could he honor his mother's memory while being asked to manipulate it? Could he navigate the treacherous waters of public perception without drowning in private guilt? And most importantly, could the royal family survive a scandal of this magnitude without irreparable damage? These are the questions that make this story irresistible, and why millions of people are still glued to every emerging detail. So, what exactly did Harry reveal in those private meetings? How did William respond to the revelation? And what steps did King Charles take in the wake of this confession? These answers are far more shocking than anyone could have imagined. They involve strategic confrontations, emotionally charged arguments, and decisions that will shape the monarchy for years to come. And every moment is laden with drama, tension, and the kind of intrigue that seems ripped straight from the pages of a Hollywood screenplay. But here's the twist that truly makes this story unprecedented. Harry didn't just admit the pressure, he exposed the strategy behind it. Meghan allegedly orchestrated a calculated plan, using Diana's legacy as both shield and sword. The implications are staggering. Not only does this shed light on Harry and Meghan's relationship, but it also raises questions about loyalty, influence, and power within one of the world's most scrutinized families. The world had never seen the monarchy exposed in this way, and the fallout was only beginning. And that is why this story matters now more than ever. The world is watching as the royal family grapples with this revelation. Social media is ablaze with speculation, experts are dissecting every statement, and ordinary people are asking themselves, what would I do in Harry's shoes? Would I protect my love at all costs, even if it meant risking history? Or would I honor the legacy of those who came before me, even if it meant heartbreak? These are the emotional questions at the core of this drama, and they make the unfolding story not just a royal scandal, but a human story that resonates with anyone who has faced impossible choices. And just when you think you've grasped the full magnitude of the situation, Harry's final words in that meeting leave everyone stunned. He hints at revelations that go beyond the personal, touching on secrets, strategies, and manipulations that could change the course of the monarchy forever. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Could anyone have predicted the storm that was brewing inside the palace long before Harry's confession? To the outside world, life at Buckingham Palace seemed flawless, seamless, almost like a fairy tale scripted for centuries. Glittering banquets, ceremonial processions, and carefully staged appearances. But behind the gilded walls, tension simmered like water just below the boiling point. A single spark, and everything could erupt. It started subtly. A glance in a hallway. A curt word in a private meeting. Small ripples of unease that few noticed, but everyone felt. Harry, in particular, had begun to sense that the palace was no longer a place of safety for him. Each day was a test, a negotiation of loyalty, love, and ambition. What did it feel like to walk through corridors where portraits of ancestors stared down, silently judging every decision? Could the weight of centuries-old expectations crush even the most determined soul? For Harry, it wasn't just theoretical. It was a daily reality. And yet, Harry tried. He tried to balance the duality of his life. On one side, the royal family, with all its pomp, protocol, and public scrutiny. On the other, his private life with Meghan, a life that promised love, companionship, and escape from the relentless gaze of the press. But the two worlds were colliding in ways he had never anticipated. Every conversation with Meghan seemed to carry an undercurrent of urgency, a subtle insistence that he act decisively, sometimes recklessly. Could love truly coexist with legacy when both demanded absolute allegiance? The first signs of strain were almost imperceptible. A postponed dinner here, a missed family event there. Yet each absence was a statement, each delay a small rebellion against expectations that had been drilled into him since childhood. And while outsiders might have assumed these moments were trivial, inside the palace they were seismic. The subtle tensions between brothers, the strained nods of acknowledgement between father and son, all pointed to a silent storm ready to break. Harry's inner conflict was compounded by the memory of his mother. Diana, always compassionate, always public-facing, had embodied a moral code that few could live up to. And yet here he was, being nudged, some might say pressured, by the woman he loved to use that very legacy as a weapon. Could anyone reconcile such conflicting loyalties without breaking apart? How far can love push someone before it turns into something unrecognizable, even dangerous? These were the questions that haunted him in quiet moments, moments no one else would ever see. Meanwhile, the palace staff noticed changes too. Courtiers whispered about hushed meetings. Aides caught fleeting glimpses of tense conversations behind closed doors. Small signs, like a missing document, a hurried exit, a door slammed a little too forcefully, hinted that the calm facade was cracking. And the media, though largely kept at bay, began to sense it. Rumors started to circulate, subtle hints of discord between Harry and the rest of the royal family. Could the press detect the storm before it fully erupted? And if they did, how would the public react to the unraveling of what many had long considered a flawless institution? In those early months, Harry oscillated between defiance and hesitation. He wanted to protect Meghan. He wanted to shield her from the scrutiny he had endured since childhood. But at the same time, he felt the invisible chains of duty tightening around him. Every choice carried consequences not just for himself, but for the institution, for the monarchy, and for the millions who revered Diana's memory. Could a young man truly navigate such a treacherous terrain without falling prey to the very pressures he sought to resist? And then came the pivotal moments that would set the stage for everything. Private conversations that blurred into confrontations. Misunderstandings that festered into resentment. Every small event accumulated into an emotional storm cloud that refused to dissipate. It wasn't just about personal disagreements. It was about the balance of power, the moral stakes, and the unspoken rules of a family that had ruled a nation for centuries. Harry, caught between worlds, began to understand the gravity of the situation. This wasn't merely a familial dispute. It was a historical pivot point. Imagine being the younger son of a king. You are loved, yes, but your role is secondary. Your every move scrutinized. Your every sentiment questioned. And now, imagine that someone close to you is nudging, even urging, you to cross a line that no one in your position has ever crossed before. Could you resist? Could you see clearly when emotions, loyalty, and love are all pulling you in contradictory directions? Harry's answer, as the world would soon learn, was that he struggled, faltered, and eventually admitted what he had been asked to do. The palace itself became a character in this unfolding drama. Hallways that once echoed with ceremonial pomp now resonated with hushed tension. Portraits of kings and queens seemed almost sentient, their eyes reflecting disapproval or anticipation. Staff moved cautiously, knowing that every action, every word, might tip the delicate balance. The very walls that had protected Harry as a child now felt like a labyrinth of judgment and expectation. Could the monarchy survive when those inside it were not only at odds with the world, but with themselves? And yet, amidst the storm, there were moments of clarity, rare glimpses where Harry seemed almost unburdened. A quiet walk in the palace gardens, a brief conversation with a confidant, a fleeting smile exchanged with a child of the family. These moments were brief, fragile, and almost impossible to hold on to, but they reminded Harry, if only fleetingly, of why he had entered this storm in the first place. He was not only a prince, but a son, a brother, a man seeking to honor the past while navigating the treacherous present. Every tension escalated to the point where avoidance was no longer possible. The first meeting with William and Charles loomed on the horizon, a confrontation that had been unavoidable for months. It was clear that private discussions had reached their limit. Secrets, unspoken resentments, and moral dilemmas could no longer be contained behind palace doors. The world outside might not have seen it yet, but inside, history was about to be rewritten. And so, the silent storm, the subtle ripples of tension, the quiet warnings, the emotional and moral pressures, culminated in a moment that would define the monarchy for years to come. Harry, standing at the intersection of love, duty, and loyalty, realized that the time for private struggle was over. The confrontation was inevitable. Words that had been simmering for months were ready to boil over. And in the moments before the meeting, he wondered, how much could he reveal? How much would his father forgive? How much would his brother tolerate? The storm had arrived. The palace, for all its grandeur, was now a stage for conflict, strategy, and revelation. And as Harry prepared to enter the room where history would be made, he could not know exactly how the events would unfold. Every choice he made, every sentence he spoke, would ripple across not only his family but the world itself. But what happened in that room? What was said? What was confessed? And how the dynamics between Harry, William, and Charles would shift, would shock the palace, the public, and the world in ways no one could anticipate. The silent storm had become a tempest, and no one would emerge unchanged. What would you do if the person you love the most asked you to do something that could change the course of history, and not in a good way? That was the dilemma Harry faced, day after day, in the months leading up to the revelation that would shock the world. Meghan Markle, in Harry's own words, was more than persuasive. She was relentless. And it wasn't just gentle nudging or casual suggestion. It was a calculated push that blurred the lines between love, loyalty, and coercion. Harry often described the pressure as subtle at first. A casual comment over coffee, a lingering look that carried unspoken expectations, a question framed as a concern for the family's future. "We can't just stay silent," she would say. "People need to understand the truth. The world will support us if we take a stand." On the surface, it sounded reasonable. On the surface, it sounded like principled courage. But beneath it, according to Harry, there was a different kind of insistence. A sense that inaction was betrayal, that love required action, and that action required leveraging the most sacred of family legacies, Diana's memory. Can you imagine the weight of that request? To use your mother's legacy. A symbol of compassion, empathy, and unwavering moral integrity, as a bargaining chip in a battle you never asked to fight. Harry's private diaries, later leaked and partially verified by insiders, described nights spent pacing the palace corridors, replaying conversations in his mind, trying to discern intention from manipulation. Was Meghan guiding him? Or was she steering him into dangerous waters, hoping he would be too emotionally invested to resist? And most importantly, could he disentangle his love for her from the moral consequences of his actions? The tension escalated quickly. What started as verbal encouragement became a series of veiled urgencies. Meghan, according to sources close to Harry, framed the situation in moral terms. If the monarchy failed to recognize the couple's grievances, it would be a stain on history itself. She reminded Harry that Diana's life had been misunderstood, misrepresented, and scrutinized relentlessly by the public and the media. "We can't let history repeat itself," she reportedly said. "We have the power to control the narrative, but we have to act now." For Harry, the logic was compelling and terrifying. He was caught between two impossible truths: protect the woman he loved, or protect the legacy he had sworn to honor. And yet, even as Harry wrestled with these pressures, contradictions emerged. Meghan's insistence on acting forcefully against the palace conflicted with her public persona, which always portrayed her as compassionate, approachable, and even diplomatic. The tension between private demands and public image created a constant sense of dissonance for Harry. How could someone who preached empathy push so aggressively toward confrontation? How could love for a partner be tangled with manipulation so profoundly? These contradictions haunted him, adding layers of guilt and confusion to an already unbearable burden. One evening, according to palace insiders, Harry was called into a private room in Kensington Palace. Meghan was waiting. The conversation, though brief, would linger in his mind for months. She laid out a plan, not crude, not overtly malicious, but precise and insistent. Every suggestion was a test of loyalty. Every sentence an opportunity to cross lines he had promised himself he would never approach. "The world doesn't understand us," she said. "But if we show them, if we leverage what they love most, they'll be on our side." And by what they love most, she meant Diana, Harry's mother, the very figure who had taught him empathy, morality, and courage. This was not coercion in the conventional sense. It was more insidious. It was love weaponized. It was emotional persuasion fused with strategic calculation. Harry had never experienced anything like it. Could he be simultaneously a loving husband, a dutiful son, and a loyal son of the monarchy? Could he protect his family while also protecting the memory of the woman who had shaped his conscience? Every choice seemed to carry catastrophic consequences. Every delay, every hesitation, only intensified the pressure. What made this chapter of Harry's life so emotionally fraught was the constant tug-of-war between private devotion and public duty. He loved Meghan. He believed in her. And yet, every time he took one step toward her plan, a voice in his head reminded him of the potential fallout. Could the monarchy survive a scandal of this magnitude? Could he survive it emotionally? And more importantly, could his own moral compass withstand the weight of leveraging his mother's legacy in ways she never would have imagined? The psychological pressure was compounded by the isolation Harry felt. Kensington Palace, despite its grandeur and history, felt suffocating. Staff members were often loyal to the institution first and to him second. Friends were kept at a distance, for fear that confidences would leak. The weight of expectation was staggering. Imagine walking through rooms where centuries of tradition watched silently, and every whispered conversation carried the potential to ignite a storm of unprecedented proportions. And amidst it all, Meghan's voice remained a constant presence in Harry's mind, urging, insisting, demanding. But even as the pressure mounted, Harry was aware of the moral peril. He knew that to comply fully would be to risk everything. To resist could mean losing Meghan. To act cautiously might please neither party. Each option carried its own form of heartbreak, guilt, and regret. And yet, he continued, because love, when intertwined with ambition, rarely allows one to step back. It demands action. It demands decisions that feel both right and terribly wrong at the same time. And then there were the small, almost imperceptible moments that punctuated this pressure. A text sent at 3 a.m., a phone call that lasted for hours, a glance that said more than words could express. Each interaction was a subtle push, a reminder of the urgency and importance of the task at hand. "You're the only one who can do this," Meghan reportedly said in one private conversation. "We have to show them. We have to make them understand. And you're the one they'll listen to." The stakes were now not just personal, but symbolic. Diana's legacy, Harry realized, had become a tool in a chess game he had never wanted to play. Every public appearance, every statement, every private conversation became a move in a high-stakes match where failure meant scandal, betrayal, and irreversible damage to family bonds. Could a young man, however principled, navigate this labyrinth of love, pressure, and historical weight without succumbing to it? And yet, despite all of this, Harry made choices that he would later come to regret, choices that would eventually lead to the explosive confession to William and Charles. He tried to reconcile the demands of his heart with the responsibilities of his birthright, but the contradictions were unbearable. How do you honor your mother's memory while also trying to protect someone you love from the harshest scrutiny imaginable? How do you navigate love when it comes with strings you cannot see, consequences you cannot predict? And so, the pressure continued, building day by day, until it reached a breaking point. Harry, once confident in his ability to manage the tensions between love and duty, found himself cornered. The private conversations, the veiled urgencies, the moral dilemmas, they coalesced into a single moment of reckoning. He knew he could no longer keep the internal struggle hidden, and he also knew that the next time he spoke, nothing would ever be the same again. But just as he prepared to confront his father and brother, just as he rehearsed the words he would use, there was a final twist. An unexpected revelation from within Meghan's circle, a piece of information that could either justify her pressure or make Harry question everything he thought he knew about the motives behind it. And in that moment, standing on the precipice of confession, Harry realized that the storm was far from over. In fact, it was about to explode. The palace had been quiet, the tension almost invisible to the public eye. But behind closed doors, Harry's world was unraveling. And what came next, the confrontation with William and Charles, would leave scars, change allegiances, and redefine the meaning of family loyalty. But what exactly was revealed in that room? How did Harry's confession shift the dynamics? And how did Meghan's pressure ripple outward to touch everyone in the monarchy? That is the question that leads us to the next chapter, a chapter that would expose not only the emotional manipulation at play, but also the intricate strategies, loyalties, and betrayals that shaped the most explosive royal revelation in decades. Could anyone have imagined that a mother's legacy, so revered, so untouchable, would become the battleground for betrayal, strategy, and emotional manipulation? Princess Diana had been gone for decades, yet her presence loomed larger than life in every corner of the palace, in every public image, in every conversation about morality, duty, and compassion. And for Harry, her memory was not just personal, it was a moral compass, a benchmark for how he understood the world. That made what Meghan allegedly asked him to do all the more agonizing, and all the more explosive when finally revealed. Diana's legacy was sacred. The world remembers her for her grace, her empathy, and her ability to connect with people across the globe. But inside the palace, it carried additional weight. Every member of the royal family felt the pressure of living up to her ideals, of honoring her memory while balancing centuries of tradition and expectation. For Harry, that meant every decision, every action, every public statement was filtered through the lens of his mother's influence. He could never escape her shadow, nor would he want to. Diana shaped him. She taught him compassion, moral responsibility, and the courage to act in difficult situations. But when Meghan allegedly suggested using that legacy as leverage, Harry felt a conflict so intense it shook him to his core. It began subtly. Meghan reportedly framed the issue as a moral imperative. Harry, people don't see the truth. The palace doesn't see the truth. You have the opportunity to make history, to honor your mother, and to make them understand what she stood for, she would say. On the surface, these statements could be interpreted as principled guidance, an appeal to justice and morality. But underneath lay a deeper, more calculated pressure, an insistence that Harry act in a way that risked manipulating the very memory he revered. Could morality be twisted into leverage? Could love justify a strategy that might betray everything you hold dear? Harry's answer was a painful struggle. The complexity of the situation cannot be overstated. Diana was more than a memory. She was a symbol. Her story resonated with millions. Her image had been carefully curated, not only by the monarchy, but by her own choices, her public actions, and her enduring compassion. For Harry, using her legacy as a tool felt like crossing a line he had been taught never to cross. How do you reconcile respect for the dead with the demands of the living? How do you balance duty with personal loyalty, love with moral responsibility? These were questions that haunted him every waking moment. And yet, Meghan's insistence was relentless. According to Harry, she framed every discussion around the moral obligation to tell the truth, even if that truth required pressure, confrontation, or leverage. Harry was caught in a web of love, loyalty, and manipulation, struggling to distinguish between guidance and coercion. The very legacy he cherished, Diana's memory, was being positioned as a tool in a strategy he neither fully understood nor entirely approved. And that internal conflict would later define the most shocking moments of his confession. The irony of the situation was stark. Diana had spent her life advocating for transparency, empathy, and understanding. Her death had cemented her image as a humanitarian and moral beacon. And yet, decades later, her memory was being discussed in terms of leverage, negotiation, and influence. For Harry, this contradiction was unbearable. Every time he considered complying with Meghan's insistence, a voice in his mind reminded him of his mother's principles. Could he truly honor her by following a path that might manipulate the world's perception of her? Or would he be complicit in a betrayal of everything she had taught him? The pressure was magnified by Harry's sense of isolation. Inside the palace, he had few confidants. Friends who could provide counsel were kept at a distance. Advisors were loyal to the institution first and to him second. In those quiet moments, he wrestled with the implications of every choice. What would Diana have done? How would she have navigated a world where love, ambition, and family duty collided in such a brutal and public way? These reflections were torturous because there was no clear answer. What made the situation even more complex was public perception. Harry knew that any use of Diana's legacy could ignite a media storm. Millions of people who still adored her would scrutinize every statement, every move, every hint of manipulation. And yet, Meghan framed it as necessary, an unavoidable step to ensure that the truth, as she defined it, would be acknowledged. It was a moral and emotional maze with no exit, only consequences, and Harry felt trapped at its center. Family dynamics added another layer of tension. William, as the elder brother, had always been the guardian of tradition and the keeper of the family's public image. Charles, as king, was acutely aware of the moral weight of his actions and the perception of the monarchy as an institution. For Harry, balancing his love and loyalty to Meghan with his obligations to family was a constant tightrope walk, and every misstep could have devastating consequences, not just personally, but for the monarchy itself. Could a single confession destabilize a family that had endured centuries of scrutiny, or could it be contained? The stakes were higher than ever, and the emotional burden was crushing. Diana's influence was everywhere, even in the smallest details. Harry often recalled moments from his childhood when she had taught him empathy, resilience, and courage. Every lesson seemed to echo in his mind as he contemplated Meghan's requests. Could the values instilled in him as a child survive the pressures of love, ambition, and public expectation? Could he act in a way that preserved the integrity of his mother's legacy while navigating the manipulations he faced in private life? These questions were not theoretical. They were the very real, daily agonies that shaped his every decision. And then came the tipping point. Conversations that had begun as guidance became insistence. Subtle pressure became explicit suggestion. Harry realized that he could no longer delay confronting his family about the situation. He could no longer carry the burden in isolation. Every day of indecision brought him closer to a moral and emotional breaking point. The silent storm within him, the tension between love, loyalty, and duty, was now demanding resolution. But before the confrontation with William and Charles, there was one last critical piece of pressure. Meghan reportedly provided information, advice, and strategies, framing the use of Diana's legacy not just as desirable, but as essential. The stakes were framed in moral and historical terms, suggesting that failing to act would dishonor Diana and jeopardize the couple's mission. Harry, already struggling with conflicting loyalties, felt that every choice carried irreversible consequences. Could he defy Meghan without betraying his own heart? Could he comply without betraying his mother's memory? And how would his father and brother react when the truth finally came to light? The storm had built to a crescendo. Every whispered conversation, every private discussion, every unspoken pressure had converged to this moment. Harry knew that when he entered the room to confront his father and brother, nothing would ever be the same. Secrets would be revealed, loyalties tested, and family bonds stretched to their breaking point. And the world, oblivious to the months of tension and pressure, would be left to witness a revelation that seemed almost too extraordinary to believe. But what exactly happened in that room? How did Harry finally confront the storm that Meghan had helped orchestrate? And how did Diana's legacy, the very symbol of morality, empathy, and love, become the centerpiece of a confrontation that would shock the monarchy and the world? The answers lie in the next chapter, a chapter where the past, present, and personal collide in ways no one could have predicted. What do you do when the person closest to you, the sibling you grew up with, the one who shared your childhood memories, your triumphs, and your fears, suddenly becomes the epicenter of a storm that could engulf the entire family? That was the position Prince William found himself in as Harry's private struggles with Meghan's pressure intensified. William wasn't blind to the undercurrents. In fact, he had been observing them long before Harry's confession would rock the palace. But watching is not the same as acting. And for William, the balance between brotherly loyalty and duty to the crown had never felt so delicate. William had always been the guardian of the family's public image. From a young age, he had understood the weight of the monarchy, the invisible responsibility that came with being heir apparent. Every decision carried symbolic significance. Every public appearance was a calculated act of diplomacy, and every private conversation had the potential to become public spectacle. And now, here was Harry, seemingly adrift, guided by emotions, pressures, and allegiances that William struggled to fully understand. Could he intervene without risking their relationship? Could he confront Harry without alienating his own brother, the person he had always tried to protect? From William's perspective, the situation was more than personal. It was a potential historical crisis. Diana's legacy was sacred, not just to Harry but to the entire monarchy and the public who revered her memory. Any misuse, any misrepresentation, could shatter trust and invite a media frenzy that the family had painstakingly avoided for decades. William knew that if Harry followed Meghan's guidance too far, the consequences could be catastrophic, not only for the family's image but for the institution itself. Yet he also recognized the human side of it. Harry was a brother caught between love and duty, morality and emotion, and that struggle was visible in every tense interaction and every fleeting expression. William's approach was careful observation at first. He watched from a distance, noting subtle changes in Harry's demeanor, the weight of his decisions, and the moments when Meghan's influence seemed to steer his brother in directions that might compromise the family's principles. William's own emotions were a tangled mix of frustration, concern, and profound sadness. He wanted to protect Harry, but he also had to consider the monarchy's stability. Could he balance these competing priorities? And how could he confront a situation that was already spiraling beyond control? It wasn't just Meghan's influence that concerned William. It was Harry's vulnerability to it. William remembered their childhood, the bond they shared with Diana, and the lessons she had instilled in them. Courage, compassion, integrity. Now, watching his brother, he saw that legacy being leveraged in ways he had never anticipated, a delicate and dangerous game that risked undoing everything their mother had stood for. How could he intervene without creating a rift that might never heal? How could he protect Harry from both the palace's scrutiny and the consequences of his own decisions? These questions haunted William, and the answers were far from simple. The stakes escalated when subtle warnings within the palace indicated that the pressure from Meghan was intensifying. A private aide, trusted by both brothers, reportedly informed William of conversations in which Harry expressed fear, hesitation, and confusion. William realized that passive observation would no longer suffice. The time for careful diplomacy was over. Action was inevitable. But what kind of action? Could he confront Harry directly, risk the emotional fallout, and still maintain a brotherly bond strong enough to survive the coming storm? In many ways, William's position was more complex than Harry's. He was both observer and participant, protector and enforcer, brother and heir. Every interaction with Harry had multiple layers of consequence. Even a seemingly casual question, "Harry, have you thought this through?" carried weight, moral judgment, and implicit warning. William had to choose his words carefully, knowing that anything misinterpreted could escalate the tension further. Could one conversation unravel months of silence, loyalty, and unspoken understanding? William also had to contend with his own emotions, frustration at Harry's choices, concern for his well-being, and anger at the manipulation he suspected was taking place. There was an underlying sense of betrayal, not just by Meghan's influence, but by the fact that Harry had been carrying this burden without confiding in him. Could William forgive the secrecy? Could he reconcile his love for his brother with the need to protect the family and the monarchy? These questions created a tension that made every encounter charged with unspoken consequences. And then came the pivotal moments of observation, the small, almost imperceptible indicators that Harry was being pushed beyond reason. A sigh in a corridor, a delayed response to a message, a subtle hesitation before making a decision. William, trained by years of royal awareness and intuition, recognized these as signs of emotional and psychological strain. He understood that Meghan's influence was not casual, it was persistent, and it was shaping Harry's actions in ways that could have long-lasting repercussions. William's strategy was patient yet deliberate. He gathered information discreetly, listened to trusted aides, and sought to understand not just the decisions Harry was making, but the emotional pressures behind them. Could he intervene before the situation escalated into public scandal? Could he shield his brother from mistakes while preserving the family's unity? Every step required a delicate balance between empathy, authority, and foresight. The emotional stakes were compounded by the knowledge that the public's perception of the family hung in the balance. Any misstep, any leaked conversation, any perceived manipulation could dominate headlines worldwide. William knew that if the pressure from Meghan led Harry to act against the family's interests, the consequences would be both immediate and lasting. Reputation, trust, and legacy all could be jeopardized. Could he navigate these treacherous waters without losing the brother he loved or the family he had dedicated his life to protecting? And so, William continued to watch closely, weighing every interaction, every subtle sign, every moment of tension. He observed Harry with a mixture of concern, sadness, and strategic calculation. Every decision, every word, every emotional beat was a potential turning point. The silent storm that had been brewing in the palace for months was now a visible tempest in William's eyes, and he realized that the next confrontation would be decisive. But even as William prepared, he could not anticipate the full scope of Harry's eventual confession. The revelations about Meghan's pressure, the moral dilemmas, and the use of Diana's legacy as leverage would shatter assumptions, redefine loyalties, and send shockwaves through the palace. The brother he had watched, the sibling he had sought to protect, was about to step into a moment that would test the bonds of family, the weight of history, and the resilience of love itself. And what came next, the confrontation, the confession, the raw truth about Meghan's influence and the pressure Harry had endured, would leave William grappling with decisions he had never imagined, forcing him to act not just as a brother, but as a guardian of a centuries-old institution. The storm was about to hit, and no one could predict who would emerge unscathed. What would you do if the very institution you were born to protect was being threatened from within by your own family? King Charles, long accustomed to the weight of duty and the scrutiny of a global audience, now faced a crisis that no textbook on monarchy could have prepared him for. His son, Harry, was entangled in a web of personal loyalties, marital pressures, and moral dilemmas, and the stakes could not have been higher. Charles knew that the next steps would determine not only Harry's future, but the reputation and survival of the monarchy itself. From Charles's perspective, the situation was unprecedented. The pressure on Harry from Meghan, the potential misuse of Diana's legacy, and the emotional strain that threatened to erupt publicly created a perfect storm. Charles had spent decades preparing for moments like this, yet nothing could have readied him for the emotional complexity of confronting his son. Every word spoken, every gesture made, carried the weight of centuries of tradition, personal history, and the delicate balance between fatherly love and royal duty. Could he navigate these treacherous waters without losing the son he loved, or the institution he had vowed to protect? Charles's intervention was not impulsive, it was calculated. He had observed Harry and William, sensed the tension in private meetings, and understood that the storm was building toward a breaking point. He also knew that the longer he waited, the more uncontrollable the situation could become. Every private conversation with aides, every monitoring of public statements, every discreet inquiry into Harry's emotional state was part of a strategy designed to contain the damage. But containment was difficult when emotions were high, and personal loyalty conflicted with institutional duty. Could Charles act decisively without being perceived as cold or authoritarian? Could he maintain the dignity expected of a king while confronting matters so intimate and raw? The first step in Charles's intervention was a private audience with Harry. The tension in the room was palpable, and for Charles, the challenge was immediate: to address the influence Meghan had allegedly exerted without alienating his son. He began carefully, with measured words designed to draw Harry into a conversation that was both candid and controlled. "Harry," he reportedly said, "I need you to be completely honest with me. Tell me what's really happening." The simplicity of the request belied the enormity of its implications. Every pause, every hesitation, every carefully chosen word could signal guilt, defiance, or understanding, and Charles had to interpret all of them correctly. Harry's response, laden with emotion, revealed the full weight of the pressure he had endured. He admitted, with visible anguish, that Meghan had pressed him to leverage Diana's legacy in ways that felt morally ambiguous and deeply troubling. He described nights of doubt, sleepless moments spent pacing the corridors, and the emotional tug-of-war between loyalty to his wife and fidelity to his family's principles. For Charles, hearing this confession was both a moment of personal heartbreak and professional alarm. Could the monarchy survive if these revelations became public? Could a father maintain authority while showing empathy for a son caught in such a moral storm? The conversation escalated quickly. Charles, known for his composure, allowed himself a rare display of frustration and urgency. "Harry, you must understand the consequences of these actions," he reportedly said. "Your mother's legacy is not a tool. It is sacred. If you misuse it, the damage will be irreversible." The emotional tension was almost unbearable. Charles was not merely scolding his son. He was articulating the weight of history, the moral responsibility of bloodline, and the practical ramifications of every decision. Could a father impress such gravity upon his son without pushing him further away? What made the situation even more complicated was Harry's simultaneous need for understanding and justification. He wanted his father to see the complexity of the emotional pressure, to recognize the love and loyalty that drove his decisions, even when they strayed into morally gray areas. Charles had to navigate this delicate terrain, balancing authority with empathy. He understood that any misstep could escalate the situation into public scandal, yet inaction could be equally devastating. How do you discipline a child who is also a prince, while protecting centuries of tradition and public trust? The stakes could not have been higher. Charles's strategy involved more than words. He employed subtle psychological cues, pauses, shifts in gaze, changes in tone, all designed to gauge Harry's sincerity, fear, and emotional state. He listened, he probed, and he guided the conversation toward accountability without alienation. The goal was clear. Harry needed to recognize the gravity of leveraging Diana's legacy, to understand the long-term consequences, and to commit to acting in ways that preserve the integrity of the family and the monarchy. But the challenge was monumental. Could emotional appeals and historical lessons outweigh the influence Meghan had exerted? As the conversation continued, Charles shifted to practical implications. "Harry, the world is watching. Every action has consequences. Every word, every move, if misinterpreted, could ignite a media firestorm." He reminded Harry that Diana's memory was not just a personal treasure, but a symbol revered by millions worldwide. Misusing it, even unintentionally, could undermine public trust in the monarchy. The tension in the room was almost tangible. How could Harry reconcile the demands of love, the expectations of family, and the scrutiny of history all at once? And how could a father guide his son without overstepping or causing emotional rupture? The emotional stakes were mirrored in Charles's own internal conflict. He had spent decades preparing for moments that tested both the man and the monarch. Yet this confrontation went beyond protocol. It struck at the heart of personal relationships, legacy, and public accountability. Could he maintain authority while preserving a bond with his son? Could he enforce discipline without extinguishing trust? And how could he act decisively when the emotional variables were unpredictable and potentially explosive? These questions shaped every word, every pause, and every decision in the room. Then came the pivotal moment, when the conversation shifted from private reflection to potential action. Charles had to decide how much guidance, how much intervention, and how much pressure to apply to ensure that the situation did not spiral further. Harry's admission had clarified the moral stakes, but it also exposed vulnerabilities, emotional cracks, and latent tensions that could erupt publicly. Charles realized that the next steps could define the monarchy's stability for years, perhaps decades. Could a father mitigate the consequences of marital influence without causing deeper familial fractures? And just as Charles was navigating this delicate balance, another variable entered the equation. William, the elder brother, observing from a careful distance, was ready to intervene if necessary. Charles had to manage not only Harry's emotions, but also the dynamics between his sons. Every suggestion, every cautionary word, every gesture would be interpreted through multiple lenses. Could the father orchestrate a resolution that addressed moral concerns, preserved family unity, and mitigated public fallout? Could he do all this while remaining emotionally connected to the son he loved deeply? As the meeting concluded, Charles left the room with a clear understanding. The storm was far from over. Harry's confession, while relieving a personal burden, had opened a floodgate of implications that would ripple through the palace, the public, and the world. Strategic decisions had to be made, loyalties had to be managed, and history had to be safeguarded, all while navigating the intricate emotional landscape of a family under extraordinary pressure. But what came next? The secret conversations, the behind-the-scenes negotiations, and the final confrontations that would define loyalty, legacy, and truth, would push the monarchy to its limits. No one, not even the king, could predict how Harry's confession and Meghan's influence would reshape the family, the institution, and the public's perception forever. What happens when private tensions between a brother and a father, decades in the making, finally erupt behind closed doors? The secret meeting that Harry, William, and King Charles held would become the defining moment of this entire saga. A room where truths, accusations, and loyalties collided, and where the fate of the monarchy teetered on the edge of revelation. This was no ordinary family conversation. It was a crucible of history, emotion, and scandal, and everyone involved knew it. The atmosphere was tense the moment Harry stepped into the room. The walls, lined with portraits of monarchs long past, seemed to watch him, silently judging each decision he had ever made. Every step, every gesture carried weight. Could a family survive the magnitude of the confession about to unfold? Could decades of trust, love, and loyalty withstand the exposure of manipulation, pressure, and moral dilemmas? For Harry, the answer was uncertain. He had rehearsed every word, weighed every potential consequence, and yet the enormity of the moment rendered rehearsal almost meaningless. From the outset, the meeting was formal, restrained, but charged with unspoken tension. William, the elder brother, maintained a poised, almost stern composure. Charles, the king, carried the weight of both fatherly concern and royal duty. And Harry, caught between love for Meghan, loyalty to his family, and reverence for his mother's legacy, teetered on the precipice of confession. The first minutes were marked by silence, each man sizing up the other, each aware of the historical gravity of the encounter. Could a single conversation resolve months of tension? Could it contain the fallout from private pressures and public expectations? The first words came from Charles, deliberate and measured. "Harry, I need you to be completely honest with us," he said. "No omissions, no evasions. Tell us what has been happening." The request seemed simple, but its implications were monumental. Every word Harry uttered could alter familial dynamics, reshape public perception, and redefine his own moral standing. Could he fully articulate the pressure he had endured without appearing disloyal, manipulative, or complicit? Could he convey the truth while maintaining the integrity of those he loved? Harry's confession began cautiously. He spoke of Meghan, of the constant nudges and persistent insistence. He described the moral and emotional pressure she had applied, framing it as necessary to influence the palace and leverage Diana's legacy. The words spilled out, layered with hesitation, guilt, and fear. Could a father understand the complexities of his son's situation when it involved both marital pressure and the sanctity of a deceased mother's memory? Could a brother remain impartial when the revelation touched on loyalty, love, and public duty? William's reaction was immediate, a mix of shock, concern, and carefully contained anger. He had sensed tension for months, but hearing it articulated with such clarity created a different emotional impact. Every phrase, every pause, seemed to widen the emotional chasm that had been quietly growing between the brothers. William's first instinct was to protect Harry, but also to safeguard the institution, the public perception, and the memory of Diana. How do you balance sibling loyalty with centuries of tradition? How do you intervene without deepening the rift or provoking irreparable harm? Charles, meanwhile, maintained his measured tone but allowed subtle expressions of disappointment and urgency to surface. "Harry, leveraging your mother's memory in this way is unacceptable," he said. "You must understand the weight of these actions and the consequences they carry, not just for yourself, but for all of us." The words struck hard, underscoring both paternal concern and institutional responsibility. Harry, hearing the moral authority of his father combined with the legal and historical ramifications, felt a mixture of relief and terror. Could he defend his choices while absorbing the gravity of their consequences? As the discussion progressed, The dialogue became more confrontational. William questioned the timing, the methods, and the reasoning behind the actions Harry described. Why now? Why leverage her memory this way? He asked, each word precise, each pause intentional. The question was not just rhetorical, it demanded answers. And Harry, struggling with guilt and emotional strain, realized that every detail would be dissected, every nuance judged. Could he justify actions that had been morally and emotionally complicated even to him? The intensity of the conversation escalated further when Charles pivoted from moral guidance to practical implications. Harry, the world is watching, and every word, every leak, every misstep can create a scandal of unprecedented magnitude, he warned. The emotional stakes were now intertwined with public consequences. Harry understood that this was no longer about private disagreements. This was about history, perception, and legacy. Could the monarchy survive the revelation of what he had been pressured to do? Could the family weather the storm without splintering irreparably? Harry's defense was heartfelt, layered with emotion, and tinged with desperation. He explained the psychological strain, the fear of disappointing Meghan, and the relentless framing of moral necessity she had imposed. Each sentence revealed the depth of manipulation, but also his vulnerability. Could love be mistaken for coercion? Could loyalty to a spouse ever justify compromising principles inherited from a mother as revered as Diana? These questions hung in the air, unanswered, yet piercingly obvious to all in the room. At one point, William leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Harry, you have to see this from our perspective," he said. "The legacy, the public trust, the family, it's all at stake. You can't allow personal pressure to dictate actions that affect millions." The words cut, not only as counsel, but as moral reckoning. Harry felt the weight of every consequence, every potential misstep. Could he navigate between familial responsibility and personal devotion without breaking entirely under the pressure? Charles, sensing the emotional tipping point, shifted strategy. He combined empathy with authority, acknowledging Harry's struggles while emphasizing the inescapable realities of their roles. "We understand love and loyalty," he said. "But the monarchy is larger than any individual. Every choice matters. Every word is historic." The statement underscored the dual pressures Harry faced, private love and public duty intertwined in a single, unyielding knot. Could he reconcile these competing demands without fracturing under the weight? Minutes stretched into hours as the conversation deepened. Harry revealed more details: late-night discussions, strategic suggestions from Meghan, and moments where he felt morally conflicted. William questioned intentions. Charles guided reflection, and the room became a crucible of emotion, logic, and historical consequence. Every revelation, every admission, built toward a climax that none of them could fully predict. Could a single meeting resolve months of tension, pressure, and moral uncertainty? Could reconciliation exist alongside accountability? And then, at the crescendo of the discussion, Harry made a revelation that stunned even the most prepared observers. He admitted that he had considered taking action that would have leveraged Diana's memory in ways that bordered on manipulation. The confession hung in the room, heavy, almost unbearable. William's jaw tightened, Charles's eyes narrowed, and the gravity of the moment seemed to echo off the palace walls. Could forgiveness coexist with moral accountability? Could strategy and empathy find balance in a room fraught with history, love, and expectation? The room fell silent for a moment, each man grappling with the implications. This was more than family drama. It was a confrontation with legacy itself, with history watching silently from the walls, and with public perception poised to erupt if the truth ever leaked. Harry's admission was both cathartic and terrifying, a release of private guilt and a revelation of public consequence. Could the family emerge intact? Could relationships survive this disclosure? Or was the monarchy teetering on the brink of scandal beyond repair? And just as the weight of the confession settled, another layer of tension emerged. William and Charles realized that the implications extended far beyond Harry's immediate choices. Every statement, every action, every private conversation with Meghan could ripple through the monarchy, the media, and global perception in ways that were unpredictable and potentially devastating. Could the family contain the fallout? Could Harry navigate the pressures of love, loyalty, and legacy without further destabilizing the palace? And most importantly, could the monarchy survive the storm that had finally arrived? But what came next? The decisions, the ultimatums, and the steps taken in the aftermath of this explosive meeting would set the stage for a series of revelations, confrontations, and public shockwaves that no one could have foreseen. The secret meeting had changed everything, and yet it was only the beginning. What does it feel like to finally speak a truth that has been weighing on you for months, even years, knowing that every word could change lives, reputations, and the course of history? For Prince Harry, that moment came during the secret meeting with his father and brother, a moment he had both dreaded and anticipated. The room, heavy with tension, seemed to close in around him. Every eye was fixed, every breath measured, every silence pregnant with expectation. Could he truly articulate the depth of the pressure he had endured? Could he convey the complexity of love, loyalty, and moral ambiguity without fracturing the fragile bond that tied him to his family? The confession began with hesitation. Harry's voice, though steady, carried a tremor, the tremor of fear, guilt, and vulnerability. He spoke of Meghan, of the subtle and persistent pressure she had placed on him to act in ways that leveraged his mother's legacy. She wanted me to use Diana's memory to influence the palace, he admitted, each word weighted with the moral